Bum 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 bum. Hey everybody, gather around. There is still room, and that's the great thing about this simulation. There's always room in the simulation. Have you ever thought about the possibility that I'm not real? What if this were all CGI? How far are we from having an all CGI Periscope that you can't tell the difference? Probably not that far away. But while we're thinking about that and while we're waiting, what's the best way to wait for stuff like that? With coffee, while you're listening to Coffee with Scott Adams. It's the best thing ever. Are you ready? Do you have your vessel, your cup, your mug, your glass, your beverage? It's time for the simultaneous sip. Oh. Somebody said they forgot to animate the hair. Yeah, why am I only halfway done here? What kind of crap CGI is this? All right, now, yesterday, I saw on Twitter, somebody said to me, well, I guess the summer of love is over. And it was a response to the story about, I guess Fox, Shannon Breen, had to move her on-location newscast. She was near the court, and the protesters were getting sort of belligerent feeling. The vibe was belligerent, not the actual actions. But she didn't feel safe, so she brought it indoors. And somebody tweeted to me, well, I guess the summer of love is over. Is it? Is it? Let me reorient your filter for a moment. What are the biggest stories of the summer? Well, we've got North Korea and South Korea falling in love again. Did Kim Jong-un not literally hug President Moon? Are they not trying to give back the remains of soldiers? Oh, sure, there's lots to do in terms of denuclearization and negotiating and all that. But we went from let's kill each other in a nuclear blaze to, hey, let's hug it out. We'll work out the details, but in the meantime, let's hug it out. Did our president, or did he not, make a mixtape for Kim Jong-un? Well, mixtape may be going a little too far, but apparently he really does have an Elton John CD that he wants to give to his buddy Kim Jong-un. So that's one big headline story. Looks like love to me. What's the other headline we've got? I've got CNN up. We've got 12 boys and their soccer coach freed from the cage. What happened when the world saw the plight of these children and one adult? The entire world focused on saving them. Why? Love. Just love. And they succeeded. What's the other story? We've got our children in cages and the bad conditions at the borders, especially for the folks seeking amnesty. Why is it that people complained and the president agreed? He signed an order to do what they could. You can't do everything instantly, but doing what they could to get those children out of the cages and reunited. Why? Why are we doing that? Is it because it's good for security? It is not. Are we reuniting the families because it's a better way to maintain border control? It is not. It's a worse way to do it. But it is a better way to pursue love. So love is driving the politics at the border right now because it's the summer of love. And so reuniting the families just went up a priority. What else do we have in the news? Let's see. I see a story on CNN's homepage that Indians of India are gearing up for a possible U-turn on anti-LGBT laws. In other words, India is moving toward love. In this case, love of LGBT, but love nonetheless. It's all love. What else we have on the news? Let's see. We've got the Putin summit. What is the biggest complaint that people have about President Trump and Putin? The biggest complaint? Is it that we're going to go to war? No. Is our biggest complaint with Russia that we're fighting over the same geographic areas? No. The biggest complaint is that maybe President Trump loves Putin a little too much. Maybe Putin loves Trump a little too much. Let's see what else we have going on here. Well, we've got the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court, the biggest issue. What is the biggest issue on the Supreme Court? Abortion. Why are there people who oppose abortion? Love. It's all about the love. Now, do I agree with their position? I take the position on abortion, most of you already know, that whatever the majority of women support on that law would be the most credible law. So I follow their lead. I don't have an independent opinion on that. But it is worth noting that the only reason that we're having a big conversation about the right to choose or abortion, depending on how you want to call it, the only reason we're having the discussion is because of love. Love for God, love of souls, love of spirits, love of the little baby and the beginning of life. Do I believe that that's when life begins? Doesn't matter. I'm not talking about me. What I'm talking about is more love. Somebody in the comments just noted that Kanye is an example of kicking that off. Do you remember when the Kanye stories happened? You know, time is sort of compressed, but the Kanye story where he said he loved President Trump, even though he disagreed with him on some policies, presumably, that was sort of the beginning of the summer, wasn't it? It was still spring, technically, but it was kicking off the summer of love. Big story. Somebody says, drives me crazy your position on abortion. Well, credibility of that law is more important than my opinion. So I subvert my opinion for credibility of the system. What else we have? We've got looking at more stories. Well, there's some tragic people died tragically, etc. Another big story is Giuliani's advice to Trump, apparently, is to not have an interview with Mueller's team until Mueller can provide some evidence that there's an actual crime that they have some evidence of, which seems to me exactly the right position. But it's also telling us that all of the Russia collusion, obstruction of justice story went from, hate, there's something terrible here, to, well, maybe you should have a conversation and then wrap it up. So there are now two possibilities for the biggest story of the past year. One is that the president has a conversation and they wrap it up and nothing happens. Or two, the president doesn't have a conversation and sooner or later they wrap it up anyway, with apparently no particular charges for the president. What's my favorite news source or sources, somebody says. My favorite position is to immediately switch between CNN and Fox News because they do have the polar opposites. They're close enough to the middle of their side, but they're also still opposites that you get a pretty good picture if you look at both. Don't look at either one. Look at both, or else you're missing the story. MSNBC is just sort of, crazy, so I don't pay any attention to them. And then on the right, there are plenty of other places you could mention that would seem a little crazier than Fox News. So I just look at CNN and Fox News, and that gives you a real good sense of the left of middle and right of middle. And they're one channel apart here. That actually makes a big difference, because I could just hit the channel down, channel up, and I go between. All right. So there are no big wars brewing, I don't think, because it doesn't look to me like Iran is heading toward war. And did you notice that Israel, I've talked about this before, has actually made several offers to Iran to help with their drought? Netanyahu has done a couple of videos in which he said, look, we got all this desalination technology. We could help you out of your drought. You just have to ask, but your regime is getting in the way. So did you think that you would see Israel making unsolicited offers to help Iran and saying great things about the people of Iran and hoping we could get together? Love is breaking out, even in the Middle East. It is. Now, I don't want to sort of de-emphasize the fact that there are still bad things happening in the world. But if you were to say to me, does this look like a summer of love? I would say the evidence shows it's moving in that direction, and fairly aggressively. To me, it doesn't even look close. I'm seeing love breaking out everywhere, right? And I've told you before this, sometimes, the good news is what happens immediately after the darkest moment. So it feels like there's some kind of a turning point here. Feels like things are getting a little bit better. All right. I think it's time to raise our mugs, our glasses, our vessels of beverages. Somebody said Don Jr. and Kimberly Guilfoyle, are apparently a couple and having a good time of it. Love is in the air. You're right. What did we hear about Justin Bieber? Justin Bieber, engaged to a Baldwin. Love is in the air. Get ready to drink to it. Now, when I say summer of love, that doesn't mean all problems are solved. It doesn't mean that we won't have more. But right now, we're not seeing stories about ISIS doing horrible things. I'm sure they're doing horrible things, but on a smaller scale. We're not seeing a big terrorism problem in this country. At the moment, it's been a while, but at the moment, there are no huge natural disasters that are fresh. We still have bad news in Puerto Rico, and the cleanup's ongoing there. But we're in sort of a good moment when we don't have a war. Our economy is doing great. No major terrorist threats that look imminent. Trade wars? Let's talk about trade wars. Do you know why a trade war isn't actually that dangerous? Do you know why the trade wars are not actually that dangerous? I'll tell you why. Because for the most part, we're dealing with our siblings. We're dealing with the people who have unconditional love for us. If we're dealing with Canada or Europe or our NATO allies, there's too much of a base of love, cooperation, respect, history, mutual defense, and all that. So we can have these little squabbles about what's the exact fair ratio of trade, etc. China, well, we've had less of a history of love with China, But what does President Trump say consistently about President Xi? I love that guy. Or words to that effect. Lots of respect, get along, great chemistry. What is the most, how would you describe the relationship between at least the leaders of China and the United States? Great. Really good. Summer of love quality, I would say. And so, of course, even in your family, you might argue about money, because everybody argues about money. But that doesn't make you love your family members less if you do it right, if you're not a bad person about it. If you had to list our biggest problems, you might say something like, well, sure, Scott, all of that looks okay, but what about our deficit? We're going to spend ourselves into ruin. Well, I saw something that James Altucher said the other day, and you'd have to fact check me on this, but he's so much smarter than the average person that I tend to believe him when he says that. And what he says is that our national debt, our national debt, I should say. What he says is that our national debt is actually far smaller than it used to be. And we could handle it, we were able to handle it just fine before. When I say smaller than it used to be, I mean as a percentage of the GDP. So we might actually have low debt. Now it's heading in the direction of higher, but when you can handle debt that well, what should you do? What should you do as a country when you're in a really good situation to handle debt? And you've got people who need things. You've got people who need health care. You've got people who need basic services. Well, you raise your debt, which allows you to pay for some of those things. So even the debt is probably more good news than bad, because we're using that money to create services. You may have seen some stories about major breakthrough in cancer treatment. Don't know how real that is yet. Those stories can be overblown in their early stages, but it's very positive. We've seen, I think, three major stories about technologies, 3 different technologies, for cleaning the CO2 out of the air. And they all seem scalable. Now, some people always jump in and say, you're going to ruin all the plants by taking all the CO2 out of the air. Well, I don't think that's a risk, because the whole point is that we're watching it carefully, and we would know when we've taken too much out of the air. You would know, because the plants would start to suffer. So it seems to me that the attention we used to give to climate change has really subsided, hasn't it? Because it just doesn't feel like it's as big of a problem as it used to be because of technology. Why was I always confident we would get to this place? Because of the Adam's law of slow-moving disasters. I talk about this quite often. When humanity, let's say, can see a big problem coming, but they've got lots of time to prepare, whether that problem is overpopulation or running out of fuel or the year 2000 problem, or we'll run out of food, or we'll have a nuclear war. All of those big problems that you can see coming, we're really good at avoiding them in the long run. We're really good at it. Employment at a great level. Our employment rates are terrific. And that's good news for everybody. Let me test something else out on you. Most of us, if you're on this Periscope, you've been immersed in politics and all things Trump related for a couple of years now, probably most of you. And in theory, the people on the right the conservatives, etc., should be somewhat anti-gay, right? Isn't that the accusation? I can't remember anybody saying anything anti-gay for 2 years. It isn't even an issue. Have you seen a lot of that? I'm not seeing any bad feelings from the right about anything gay. There are certainly people on the right who don't want to personally be gay, but that would be true of everybody. People personally prefer whatever they are. But it doesn't seem like it's a thing anymore. That's good. Yeah, there might be some people who in their private thoughts think, oh, this marriage thing, I wanted to save that for my personal religious, preferences. But I don't see anybody complaining about it. You know what you don't see? Do you see like conservatives surrounding a house of, a gay couple who got married and, do you see them with their signs, hey, you shouldn't be married? Nope. And one of the reasons you don't see that is that the Supreme Court ruled, and based on the Constitution of equal everything, the judges decided that gay marriage was fine, and that the Constitution supports it. The thing that the left doesn't understand about conservatives, one of the biggest things they don't understand, is that conservatives are about following the rules in the Constitution, the rules of law, and the rules of the Bible, knowing that sometimes there's some interpretation going on there, but they're very rule-based. So, and why this matters is that when you look at, say, the Supreme Court rulings about Roe versus Wade, that was based on this concept of privacy. Now, again, without giving you my opinion on the topic of abortion, because I don't do that, I'm going to say that looking at the Constitution and finding a right for abortion in the privacy part was a bit of a stretch. No matter what you think about abortion, whether it should or should not be legal, that's a separate question. But just whether it's justified in the Constitution was kind of a stretch to get to this, privacy explanation. But when you look at gay marriage, the Constitution says everybody has to have the same rights. That's an easy sell. So if you're telling me that the smartest people in the world, the Supreme Court, the smartest people, in theory, a bunch of smart people, not in the world, but, a very smart group of people looked at the Constitution and said, oh yeah, this is fine. Gay marriage, Constitution says that's fine. Well, that's a lot easier for conservatives to go with because the process was followed. The rule comes directly from the main document that they respect. It's been interpreted to be consistent with that document. The argument makes sense. I don't think you'll ever see a major push. You might see some minor push, but I don't think you'll ever see a major push from conservatives against gay marriage because the process worked. It's, equal rights is equal rights. The Constitution gives you that. But the right of privacy is a harder argument to make, and maybe the federal government isn't necessarily the ones who should be making this sort of rule. So you can see why abortion rights are still on the table, and it's exactly because the argument that it's in this document was a little tortured. Okay. I say major and measure almost the same. Yeah, I do. Yeah, I don't want to talk about the abortion question per se on this Periscope. The reason for the California fires, because it's summer. Now, is it my imagination, or did we have a whole summer of kids in cages? It's like the kids at the border in cages. You had the kids trapped in the caves. You've got the fetuses in their mother's wombs. It's all about children trapped somewhere. And yeah, Summer of the Trapped Child. And then on top of that, you've got the real problem with sorry, I was distracted by that question. Let's go on now. I got too distracted by your question. By the way, if you think it's easy to talk coherently while reading questions at the same time that are on an entirely different topic, it's not easy. So I hope you grade me on a curve when you see that. I was going to talk about the Democrats trapped in mental boxes. And I've said before, and I mean this not in a mean way. I mean this in a descriptive way. So let's take the personal insult out of it. I mean it in a descriptive way. The Democrats have taken the child view of a number of things. The children's view is the short term, I need my candy now. The adult view is, no, if you eat candy now, you won't be able to eat your meal, you won't be healthy, you won't have a good life because you're not healthy. So the adult view is, what's the long-term implication? The child view is, well, I want this now. I want this. So when you saw it in the children in cages, both sides wanted no children in cages. The Democrats thought they needed it immediately without attention to what that might cause or any bigger problems or how long it takes to do something like that. The Republicans said, yeah, we don't like this either. But, there are some real world reasons that things are happening. Let us try to get to this place where we're not doing it, but we're going to have to do a lot of things to make that happen. Kind of an adult view, even if you disagree with it. And it's important for me to say, I'm not saying that the one is right and the other was wrong. I'm just saying that the short term versus the long term are what we're seeing. Please interview Hotep Jesus. Maybe I will someday. Wrong. The Republican view is short-term profits. Do you think the Republican view is short-term profits? Now, there's certainly a question about whether business in general is designed in a way that encourages all business owners of any type to think about the short term, because that's when they get their bonuses are based on the short term usually. I don't know. I'm not seeing that. I'm seeing conservatives thinking about the long term, because everything from lowering taxes to lowering regulations, those are all, or even the tariff fight, the trade war stuff, that's all about the long term, isn't it? Isn't that 100% about the long term? Because those things don't really have a this month impact, except, the stock market, and that just fluctuates. All right. Dolphins are patrolling North Carolina coast against sharks. Are they trained dolphins, or are they just doing it because they do that? China is taking the long term compared to U.S. on tariffs. China does take the long term. I'll tell you, that's one of China's greatest strengths. I was talking about the difference between, Democrats and Republicans seems to be the short term versus the long term view of things. But China is the ultimate adult. It's like whatever's higher than an adult. It's like a grandmother type of view of the world, that it's the super long term is what matters. So there's a reason that they're around, doing well. Musk sent his sub over and left it for future rescues. Yeah, you have to give Elon Musk his full due of credit for that. You have to know that behind the scenes, there was a tremendous amount of probably both expense and brain power and effort and suffering that went into building that little personal sub so quickly. It's just that bravery and good old human know-how got it done faster because they had to. They sort of had to beat the rain. And by the way, this rescue of the Thai children may be a bigger story than just the people involved. This is one of those things that focuses your priorities. I think it has the Thai children thing has the unintended result of just making us better people. Don't you think? That story, the story of the Thai children, had everything in it as a story about the perfect human situation, including the Thai diver who died. Tragically he died. But he died in the service of trying to save these people. So he died a hero. The people who got in trouble were children. There was one adult there, but I don't think anybody thinks they should have known this was a risk necessarily. So you had a cave full of innocence. Children are the ultimate innocence, right? They're innocent. And they're in this cave, and you saw the entire world stop fighting with each other for a minute and say, all right, stop everything. How do you get these kids out of this cave? I would venture that almost everybody who heard that story did a little bit of thinking about how they would go about it. It's like, okay, could I help? Probably a billion people said, I wonder if I could help. Do they need money? Do they need an idea? Maybe I can help. So it was probably, in terms of the public mood, the way we think of ourselves as human beings, the way we interact with each other, the things we get mad about each other over that, probably aren't as big as they should be. All of that got compressed and focused into this one story about everybody being on the same side to save the innocents, to save the children. And you saw the very best of human ingenuity. I mean, the ingenuity was just off the chart. And I'm not just talking about Elon Musk. The number of ingenious ideas, right down to what did the divers actually do and how did they get through the cave, was outstanding. So you saw love, good intentions, you saw heroism like you've never even heard of before. I mean, this was consistent. People were lining up. Correct me if I'm wrong, but by the time of the actual rescue, they had more divers volunteering. Just think about this. There were more divers volunteering to go where that diver had just died doing the same job, just died. And people were lined up to do it. That's the world you're living in right now. It's not all bad news. Do I think a Bitcoin ETF will be approved? Well, that's about the most different topic that I can think of right now. And the answer is, I don't know. That's probably just a technical question about, financial legalities. Not my category. Yeah. Think about right now, what's the biggest problem in the world? Right? Think about it. It's the summer of love. What are our big problems right now? Healthcare is too expensive. Yeah. But everyone can get healthcare. It's just not efficient or good or as good, but everybody can get it. Compare that to 50 years ago when people just couldn't get it. Emasculation of the West. We don't talk to each other. Our smartphones. Yeah, maybe our smartphones are the biggest problem we have right now. Pension debt. Maybe. We'll see. All right, I'm just looking at your comments. All right, so here's my point. Yes, TDS might be the biggest problem we have. So if your biggest problems are things like people using their smartphone too much, people are protesting because the weather is really good and they didn't get exactly what they wanted, loneliness, that is a big problem, actually, although the internet does a lot to help that. But let me ask you a question. Is there anyone out there who feels less lonely during these periscopes? Now, I would not assume that all of you feel lonely, just in general. But how many of you feel less lonely when I'm on Periscope talking to you directly? I'm just looking at your comments. Yeah, look at all the yeses. So we do have a society which is starved for human connection. Wow, that's more than I thought. If you're watching these comments, it's a non-stop string of yeses. People saying that they do feel less lonely when they're talking to me on Periscope. That's one of the magic things about this particular technology is that it's interactive. You see me reading your comments and you see me reacting to them, so it feels a little bit more like a conversation, even if I don't answer your exact comment. Yeah, I have to tell you that soon after I left my marriage, I would turn on Periscope, other people's Periscopes, and just to leave it on so that there was a human talking sometimes, because my work is the type that I have to do alone. And sometimes I just needed a human voice. So one of the reasons that I like watching the news is because they're human beings and it's real time and they're sort of talking to me and I know they're not recorded. I'm a little less lonely if somebody is talking in real time, even if they're not talking directly to me. Somebody said, is there a Scott Adams stuffed animal you can buy? That would be the ugliest stuffed animal. That would sell exactly one, apparently. All right. How about more unified positive framing? Well, I tried to do that today. I hope it worked. Okay, how many of you feel that I've made my case that the summer of love is here? So switch the question. That's my question. Have I made my case that in a relative sense, not everything is going perfectly, never does, but in a relative sense, have we reached a point where if you don't count the fact that people are marching in the streets for just about nothing, that pretty much the world's in a good place right now, in a really good place. I would say the best place it's ever been. Yes, summer of love is here. Right on time, right in the middle of the summer, and right when you wanted it, and right when you needed it the most. Now, that's not to say things won't turn ugly before the midterms. Life is not a straight line. Somebody says, what's next after the summer of love? What is next? Do you need a next? I heard a fascinating thing from, who was I just listening to? Oh, it was Jordan Peterson, who was saying that the Army has done lots of studies of IQ and who can do what, and they discovered that people with IQ below 85 can't be in the military because there's literally nothing they can do right. So below a certain IQ, there's just sort of no job you can do because the world is complicated now. It's not just, dig a hole or, be in the military and, run at somebody with a sword until they stab you. We live in a complicated world, and something like 10% of the population actually can't do anything. They will never be able to do anything in a complicated world. So much must be done to refactor the way we live so that as that 10% of people grows, and it could be the society keeps getting more complicated. I like to use the example of taking a flight on an airplane. Probably almost everybody on this Periscope has taken a flight on an airplane. It's kind of a complicated thing to do because even just checking in at the airport has 5 different ways you do it, depending on whether you did it online, whether you want to tip and do it on the curb, and whether you've checked your bags already, whether you want to upgrade your seats. There are probably 5 different ways just to check in, and there are all these different airlines with different deals, and what seat do you get, and is it a return flight? And if you think about it, my guess is that right now, 20%, more than the 10% who can't do anything, 20% of the population isn't smart enough to take a flight. Now, that also assumes they don't have somebody with them like a spouse or a family member who could walk them through it. But I'll bet 20% of the public of the United States, if you handed them a check and said, here's all the money, I'm going to solve the money part for you. Take a flight. Figure it out. I believe 20% of the United States, even if they had the money and it was only going to be used for just that purpose to take a flight, I don't believe they could figure it out. I don't believe they could get themselves to the airport and on a flight and at their destination. 80% could, but I think 20% would not be capable of doing that. And it might be that things are just going to keep getting harder until 30%, 50% can't really do anything of use because the robots will start eating away at all the easy stuff. So we have to reconfigure society. So somebody said, what comes after the summer of love? I would say maybe not immediately, but certainly after. We have to figure out how to rebuild our cities, rebuild our lives, rebuild everything from healthcare to how do people make money. We have to reconfigure this stuff so that everybody has at least a chance of a meaningful existence. And we're not close to having that solved. Yes, and somehow we have to figure out how to live socially again. Technology has allowed us the option of being alone, and we take it because it's easier to be alone. People are annoying, right? Even if you're not an introvert, and I'm a bit of an introvert, people are kind of annoying. So if you have an option of being alone, it's just easier to take it if you're an introvert, and a lot of the population is. So a lot of people have chosen to take themselves out of the social mix just because it's easy to do it now. And I think that probably is very bad for our mental health. But I believe, based on the Adam's law of slow-moving disasters, that we will figure out how to live with all types of IQs and all types of capabilities. Must learn to care for others. Have kids. I'm not sure having kids is for everybody. You know, I get that we're probably all, most of us, maybe 85% of us are born with some kind of an instinct to have kids. I have the instinct, but it never really was an option I was serious about. Child care combined with elder care, combined with gardens. I would throw in pet care. I think we could, by the way, I don't know if I've ever talked about this, but I have this long-range vision of elder care places where imagine the building is sort of a U-shaped, and there's a big grass soccer field in the middle. And so the building is for the elderly, and they all have a porch or a balcony where they can wheel out their little wheelchairs. And they can watch children who would sort of reserve the field, and it would all be kids, so that you can hear the life and the children, but you don't have to be the ones taking care of them. So if you're elderly, you just like to be around it, and so you'd be close to children. And then I imagine that there would be a dog park right next to, adjacent to the elder care facility, so that the elderly can just be wheeled out into the dog park and just sit in the middle. And people will bring their dogs, and the dogs run around. And right in the middle is just a little shaded area where the people in their wheelchairs can just hang out, surrounded by dogs that are having a good time, and people who brought their dogs, and they feel the life and the connection. They've got something to talk about. The dogs at least come up and touch them, because if you're old, nobody touches you. So, you want at least the dogs to come up. So I think there are ways to reconfigure society that everybody's getting some kind of a social touch at a relatively low cost. All right, no cats, somebody says. Yeah, I think the cat petteria, that I call it, that's my own name, a cat petteria, is a place that has a whole bunch of cats that are just playing, and they're happy, and they're climbing on stuff. And humans who are not allergic to cats can pay or go there for free, and you just go in an environment where there's just a lot of cats, because people like cats. Not everybody. Yeah. Not petteria. All right, I think we've said enough for now. That's all the optimism I have. Enjoy the rest of your summer of love, and until I talk to you again, have a great day.